Continuing on with Chapter 8. It was necessary for them to go outside and climb in through a window to reach the room, because the inside doorway to it was blocked. "Oh, it's like a ghost town," said Nancy, as she surveyed the rusted machinery and layers of dust. "To think that this once was a prosperous factory." "It isn't much of a tribute to the Heaths, I'll admit," commented Mr. Drew. "What was this machine used for?" Nancy asked, interested in a steel saw attached to it. "This is for cutting," her father explained, pausing beside it. The clamshell is placed in the machine. An operator moves a lever, and down comes the circular steel saw. Presto! A little shell disc drops into the hopper. Another machine slices the disc into pieces of uniform thickness, and there you have some buttons. "How clever," said Nancy. "The buttons pass through still another machine, which polishes them," Mr. Drew went on. "In the last operation, thread holes are drilled through them. To think all this was done right here in River Heights, and I never knew anything about it," Nancy said in wonder. Mr. Drew turned away. "I guess there's nothing more to learn, Nancy, either about the buttons or the mystery of the factory. If those men deliberately caused the explosion, they skillfully covered their work. We may as well leave before we're accused of trespassing." Bitterly disappointed, Nancy was just about to let her father help her through the window when her sharp eyes caught sight of something. "Dad, look," she cried. Sticking out from a corner of the rubble in the doorway lay a scrap of paper, and near it were freshly made footprints. Nancy darted toward them and picked up the paper. A glance sufficed to show her that the words on it might have value. The sheet had been torn in such a way that only part of the message was there. It was written in a man's hand and read, "Dear C, some secret which I, in a wall, famous, worthy." Nancy showed her father what she had found. "Interesting," he commented, scanning the torn paper, "but I can't say that it makes much sense. The footprints might be a better clue." He stopped to examine them. "Freshly made, without a doubt," he said. "Evidently, your two strangers have visited here since the explosion." "Then that practically proves they're searching for something," Nancy concluded. "Something they think was hidden and could be found only by blasting it out." "If that's true, I'm sure it has nothing to do with Floriana," said Mr. Drew. "Maybe not," Nancy sighed. She was staring at the torn note. "I believe I stumbled on a worthwhile clue just the same," she said slowly. "I can guess now that one of these words is secret." She pocketed the message and reluctantly left the factory with her father, who had an appointment at his office and already was late. At home again, she spent more than an hour trying to piece together the missing words of the note. Who had written them? The paper appeared old, the ink slightly faded. "It wouldn't surprise me if Walter Heath wrote the message," she said to Hannah Gruen. "No way to prove it, though." "I know how you might find out," was the housekeeper's surprising answer. "How?" "Walter Heath was a member of the River Heights Historical Society before his death. Isn't it likely the society would have specimens of his handwriting?" "Hannah Gruen, you're a genius," Nancy cried, giving the woman a hug. "I'm off to the Historical Society building this very minute." Luck was with her. On many of the books and pieces of furniture which Walter Heath had given to the museum, she found not one, but several samples of the deceased estate owner's handwriting. "It's the same as that in the note," Nancy decided excitedly, comparing the script. "Now, if only I can find the missing half of the note." Many questions plagued the girl. Had the torn sheet fallen from some niche in the wall at the time of the explosion, or had one of the strangers dropped it when leaving the ruins? "Hector Keep may have the other part," Nancy speculated. "If so, I'm afraid I'll never see it." Seeking her father's aid once more, Nancy asked him to talk to the lawyer and try to get what information he could from him about the Heath case. Again, she was to be disappointed. "Mr. Keep came honestly by his name," Carson Drew reported somewhat later to his daughter. "He certainly kept his secrets from me." "Didn't he tell you anything?" Nancy asked. "Nothing worth mentioning. As soon as I spoke of Heath Castle and the button factory, He closed up as tight as one of me Hardy's clams. Did you mention Floriana's name? Yes, Hector Keep stressed that he was still searching diligently for her. I wonder, said Nancy softly. The Heath Castle mystery was no nearer a solution than before. Eager as the girl was to revisit the estate, she found it impossible because her father had made her promise not to go there alone, and none of her friends would be free to accompany her until the next day. I know what I'll do, she thought enthusiastically. Go over the whole Heath property by plane. For some time, Nancy had been taking flying lessons whenever it was possible. She had not soloed yet, but hoped to do so very soon. Telephoning her instructor, she made her appointment. I wondered when I was going to hear from you again, the young man said as the two climbed into his plane. Have you been busy solving a new mystery? There's a new mystery bothering me right now, laughed Nancy. How to work all these gadgets. Despite her words, she started the motor and headed the plane into the wind as if she were a seasoned pilot. Reaching sufficient altitude, she banked and headed in the direction of Heath Castle. When I get home, I'll map the area, she thought, making careful mental notes as she flew over the estate. At least I have a good idea now where the castle is situated. Nancy circled the area several times. Satisfied that she could jot down a general plan of the place, she started to leave. Suddenly the girl noticed a cloud of smoke in the vicinity of the castle. Curious, she banked the plane and flew over the estate. The smoke was rising in a mass, but Nancy could not make out its exact origin because the foliage was so dense. Someone is on the estate anyway, she mused. Oh dear, I hope the fire won't do any damage. The plane nosed downward, reminding the girl that she must pay close attention to her piloting. For the first time, her instructor spoke to her. With a hasty glance at the altimeter, she climbed to a safe height and returned home to make a perfect landing. You're doing better every day, the young man praised her as they climbed out. At this rate, you'll soon solo. I hope so, grinned Nancy. I think every girl should learn to fly. What do you hear from Ned Nickerson? The instructor inquired. Ned Nickerson? Nancy tried to act unconcerned, but she blushed becomingly. Why, I had a letter from him yesterday. He's in South America. Miss him, don't you? Yes, I do, Nancy said truthfully. Ned and I had wonderful times together. He hopes to get home soon. Won't he be surprised when he finds out about my flying? Keep at it. Maybe you'll get your license before he returns. Upon returning home, Nancy sketched an air map of the Heath Castle grounds. The next day, she showed it to George and Bess, proposing that they start at once for the castle. Packing a picnic lunch, the three girls set out in Nancy's car. This time they dressed more appropriately for the trip by wearing riding breeches and stout boots. On the way, Nancy explained the latest developments in the mystery. Nothing must drive us away from the estate until we've investigated every nook and corner of it, she declared as the car rocked over the bumpy road. I'm sure we can find a clue there. Directly ahead loomed the familiar ivory-covered boundary wall. Nancy parked the automobile beneath a cool tunnel of overhanging tree limbs. Leaping out, the girls walked to the rusty gate. There they stopped short, staring in dismay. Tacked to the barrier was a freshly painted sign which read, "No trespassing, under penalty of the law." Chapter 9. The Pointing Finger. Nancy and her friends stared at the no trespassing sign, scarcely believing their eyes. It had not been there at the time of their previous visit. Obviously, it was intended to discourage just such persons as themselves from entering the grounds. Someone must have seen us here, muttered George in disgust. Nancy, you were right when you thought you saw a man peering at us from behind the evergreen. This puts an end to our exploring, Bess said, disappointed. We'll have to eat our picnic lunch some other place. Nancy was not so easily discouraged. She argued that if they were to help Mrs. Fenimore and Joan, they would have to do better than Hector Keep had in locating the missing dancer, and no signs were going to keep her from hunting for necessary clues. It's most important that we try to find Floriana, she assured her companions. If the fortune is saved, it probably will mean Joan and her mother will be provided for. They certainly need help, said Bess, but dare we trespass here? I really have police sanction to do so. Lieutenant Masters urged me to take the case, Nancy replied. Then I guess it's all right, said George. She had walked to the rusty gate to peer between the spikes. The grounds seemed as deserted as ever, but as Nancy and Bess joined her, the girls were startled to hear the sudden barking of dogs. Listen, Nancy exclaimed. An instant later she said, they're inside the grounds. And coming closer, Bess said uneasily, they must have heard our car stop here at the gate. Well, that settles it, she declared, almost in relief. We can't possibly go inside now. We might be chewed to pieces. She turned as if to go back to the car. George and Nancy lingered by the gate, reluctant to leave. Soon they glimpsed two large black and white hounds through the bushes. Ugly-looking brutes, George commented. Evidently they've been left here to guard the grounds. Seeing the intruders, the dogs began to bark louder than ever. One of them came to the gate, and with his front paws on the iron bars, growled fiercely at Nancy. Instead of retreating, the girl spoke kindly to him and held out her hand. Hello, old fellow, she said soothingly. Where did you come? When did you come to live here? To the amazement of Bess, the animal began to whine in friendly fashion and wag his tail. Reaching a hand through the gate, Nancy patted his head. Be careful, Bess warned her sharply. To the surprise of her cousins, the other dog had stopped barking and now came forward. Nancy patted his head also and talked to him. These dogs aren't vicious, she said, elated. Girls, I'm sure we can explore the grounds safely. I'm willing to try it if you are, George offered. Bess was afraid of the dogs and said so. But I'll come along, she agreed. I'll go first, Nancy offered courageously. If they don't attack me, it will be safe for you two to follow. George and Bess watched uneasily as their friend climbed the crumbling wall. On the ledge, she hesitated a moment. The dogs had set up a loud barking again. Nancy realized that for the animals to be friendly while on the opposite side of an enclosure was one thing. For them to let anyone enter the grounds was another. Don't attempt it, Bess called nervously. Please. Nancy spoke gently but firmly to the hounds. Then, taking a chance, she began to lower herself very gradually. One of the dogs came straight toward the girl. Her heart began to beat wildly, but she showed no outward fear. Well, old fellow, she murmured, do I come in? To her relief, the animal ceased barking, and displayed only a friendly interest in her. It's all right, Nancy called to her chums. Come on over. She continued to pat the hounds and talk to them as George climbed the wall and leaped down. The dogs did not try to molest her. As soon as Bess's head appeared, however, they began to snarl. Don't mind them, Nancy called encouragingly. They're only testing your nerve. They'll tear me to pieces if I jump down there. Bess was so nervous that she was almost in tears. They'll leave you alone if you don't show any fear, Nancy assured her. It was impossible for the frightened girl to do this. Go on without me, she said after 2 vain attempts. Those dogs just don't like me. I'll wait in the car. All right, Nancy agreed. Don't eat up all the lunch while we're gone. She and George set off alone. The dogs remained behind. Soon the girls located the avenue of trees which led past the ruined loggia. Here's a path that I'm sure will lead to the castle, Nancy remarked as they came to a forking trail. Maybe, smiled George, but this sign reads to the fairy gallery. Let's see where it goes anyway, urged Nancy. They passed a weather-stained statuette in a wall niche, lingered a moment to gaze at a rose garden choked with weeds, then went on to a clearing. Before them rose an artistic structure. The sides were formed of slender, twisted stone columns, while sprawling over them was a roof of untrimmed vines supported by thick stalks. From one end of the shelter hung a rustic sign on which were the words, "Who enters here may fairies meet, with laughter soft they should be greet." How pretty, said Nancy dreamily.